I know every operating
At my
system like
last
the
job,
back of
in
my
my
hand.
current role, I
When it comes to
25 years of experience and have worked with several people from your company. I've been recognized for my passion. My team is everything.
LinkedIn delivers candidates who rise above the rest. With an up-to-date view into shared connections, skills, and interests you won't find anywhere else. See why 86% of small businesses who post a job on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within a day. Post a job for free at linkedin.com/achieve. LinkedIn, your next great hire is here.
Local news at this point is something that is having a resurgence of at least like respect for and the understanding of why it's so important. At least many in media, I think, understand how important it is. Like I truly believe that the future of news will be figured out in communities, not at the national level, because at the national level, again, there's always audience for what you're doing there. It's not about like in a community, you have to connect to the audience that you have.
This is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewirtz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Leigh Munsil. Leigh is the editor-in-chief at the San Antonio Report, which is a nonprofit hyperlocal online news source in San Antonio, Texas, I'm assuming. Yes, it says it right there. It just didn't say it in the description. And unlike a lot of guests on the show, she actually came from national media to local media. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. But Leigh, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So I kind of start every podcast the same because this is our first time meeting face-to-face and for the audience. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background, I kind of alluded to it a little bit there, and your story in local media, like what's led you to where you are now.
Yeah, I kind of went from local media to national media and then back to local media, but glad to talk about it. I went to Arizona State University, which has a great journalism school, the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. I was the editor-in-chief of my college paper at the State Press, which I'm very proud of the work we did there when I was at the State Press. And actually, the job I have now, editor-in-chief of a local community newsroom, is the most similar, I would say, to that college newspaper editor-in-chief job that I've had since many years ago now. So went from Arizona to a year at the Dallas Morning News. I did a couple internships when I was in college at the Orange County Register and the Arizona Republic. And so newspapers was kind of where I got my start. Dallas Morning News, I was there the year that the Rangers were in the World Series and the Cowboys, or well, not the Cowboys, but the Super Bowl was hosted in Arlington that year. And so got to cover lots of really interesting stories. And I was kind of on the Metro desk, and that was a great kind of first year out of school. And then I went to DC, which was always kind of my goal. I had done a White House internship when I was in college and wanted to get back to that obsessive political world of national politics. And I was like, yeah, I got a job at Politico. So that was my first job in DC. Absolutely loved it. I did web production for a while and then moved into covering defense. So the Pentagon, DOD, where the money goes, so industry, specifically defense industry, the Pentagon, and then Congress, and kind of that triangle between the three of them. And really just interesting topic area to cover. And I loved doing it. But then 2016 rolled around, or the 2016 campaign rolled around. And what was happening was that, the presidential campaign was the story of the day every day. And so I had this really interesting beat gig and wanted to get back to editing and also kind of the biggest stories of the day every day. And so at that point, I went to The Blaze to edit kind of their politics coverage for the 2016 campaign. And yeah, that was just a transition into editing, as well as, I really had a strong conviction. The Blaze was doing really great digital traffic at the time, especially Facebook was kind of the fire hose of traffic in the 2015 era, and things have changed a lot. But anyway, I went to The Blaze and really felt like the coverage at a place like that should be the exact same quality you get from a CNN, Politico, other places like that. And so I was at The Blaze for about a year through the 2016 campaign. And then from there, I moved to CNN to do digital politics. Was there for a little bit, and then, sorry, this has become a long story.
That's all good.
Then was editor of The Point with Chris Lizzo, which was an analysis section and within CNN, kind of like a little startup within the larger structure. And analysis, I think, is going to be a big part of the future of news. And so doing that well and responsibly, thoughtfully, was a really important thing to me. And then the pandemic happened, and I was sitting in my basement, and I still had my very stressful Washington, D.C. job. But everything was closed, and I was doing it from my Capitol Hill basement, and was like, you know what do I want to do with my career at this point? And helping figure out the business model of local news is what brought me to San Antonio, and now leading a newsroom in the community space, which at my going away party, just lots of DC journalists who I'd worked with for a long time, like from multiple outlets. The biggest thing I heard when I was leaving DC to go be the editor of a community news outlet was, wow, I wish I thought of that. That there was a lot of just intrigue among those who have been doing this forever in this idea of, can you go build something in a community that you're proud of, that you feel like is helping set us up for the future? And I think that's a lot of what I've been trying to do at the San Antonio Report. And the good news is that communities are strong, and great news coverage helps communities. And so I've enjoyed doing the work every day. You really feel the impact of your work in a community, I think, a little bit differently.
That's great. Yeah, I get all kinds of stories on the show, but I haven't heard anything quite like that, especially going, on the military spending beat or whatever it was in DC. Mm-hmm. And then I love talking models and rebuilding local news. That's what a lot of this show is about. So very cool. And anyway, you left me off at a good segue. Can you tell me about the report, the San Antonio Report, and just kind of your day-to-day there, just about the organization a bit?
Yeah, so the San Antonio Report is about 13 years old, which in nonprofit years is a very mature nonprofit. There weren't that many in the country when we were getting started, like ProPublica, Texas Tribune. All the ones you've heard of were around, but those were the only ones around. We started as the Rivard Report. Bob Rivard, our founder, and his wife, Monica Mackley, started it as a blog, mostly covering downtown development. It's grown a lot over the years. So now we have a full staff of between 18 and a few more professionals. The newsrooms is I have 8 full-time reporters to cover the whole city. So it's a lot of work to do. But the cool thing about a community newsroom like ours is that as a nonprofit newsroom, we're trying to build a community newsroom that really thinks about what's the best work we could be doing today, right? Like it's not always about the profit or the success or the traffic. Obviously, I love digital traffic more than most things in the world. I always want more traffic, but sometimes you make trade-offs. In fact, all day you make trade-offs with traffic and trust. And so trying to do within a nonprofit, trying to do the right thing, connecting with the community, doing slow and important community engagement efforts, listening tours, like talking to people in the community about if you don't read us or don't trust us, why? And, sometimes being in some tough conversations about, why people don't trust legacy media and don't understand what we do and don't see why we would even want to do it. And so, doing that building of a community newsroom that represents the community and helps the community better understand what's happening in local news as well as how it affects their lives is really important work. And I think we're making progress on those counts. And we cover government and politics as some of our most read coverage, business and development. We still cover, new projects coming in and what that means. There's a effort right now. It's actually just got voters approved the county portion of the funding, but to move the San Antonio Spurs from the east side of the city back to downtown San Antonio. And so that's a huge city shaping development project that we've been covering and we'll continue to cover what that looks like. But San Antonio has a lot of really interesting storylines. I think coming at it from the national perspective has helped me really see these macro storylines that I think are so interesting, like blue city in a red state, like what sort of communities decide to live in a place that's a blue city in a red state. We're right on kind of the trade corridor between Mexico and the U.S., and so that north-south trade corridor. We're also smack dab in the middle of the country, and so it's a hub for national conventions and such. There's a huge convention center. So a lot of Texas cities are kind of convention center hubs like that. Texas in general, it serves that purpose a lot, but it's also Another interesting thing coming from the national political world is we're a majority minority city, so we're majority Hispanic, and that demographic is the fastest growing demographic among the U.S. electorate. And so the conversations we're having in the local context about politics, I think, have implications for the future of national politics and the future of national conversations, partly because our electorate right now reflects the future of the U.S. electorate. And so there's a lot of just really interesting stuff happening. Is really fast-growing area of the country, partly because of affordability. Really, Austin is just up the road by about an hour from San Antonio. Austin, as we know at this point, housing is really intense, and the infrastructure issues that Austin has. But the cost of living in Austin and San Antonio is exactly the same, except for the cost of housing. And so the cost of housing is so much more expensive in Austin. And so storylines like that about how does a city grow responsibly? What does that look like? Growth is coming for Texas cities, whether Texas cities want that or not. But how do you do it responsibly? Thinking about walkability, shade over bus stops, green spaces, all the things that transplants are looking for in communities, as well as will improve potentially the lives of citizens that have been here for a long time. And so all that to say, these are kind of the storylines I see that are interesting, and there's so many more. But that sort of community coverage, I think, is really just fun to see trend lines and then be able to follow them and what they mean.
Man, yeah, I know all about the growth side of it. I spent most of my life in Denver. We've had our own crazy growth, and it's, if you look at the charts, it's nothing compared to Austin and that whole corridor.
Yeah.
How many people? What's the population of San Antonio? Just out of curiosity, do you know?
I can tell you this: it's the 7th largest city in the U.S. In its overall
in the metro
geographic area. So yeah, the population is over 1.5.
Okay.
million.
Sorry. Yeah. I was just saying Texas is kind of its own country. And I think, you guys have 5 or 6 cities that are bigger than some states and everything. I was just curious.
Yeah, exactly.
I just had somebody else from San Antonio on the show, and he was saying the same things along the lines of the kind of business corridor down to Mexico and back up. It's funny. They're just very similar things there. Kind of my next question, and you kind of prompted this in our initial conversation or back and forth, that you came from national media to local, or forward back and forth, I guess. And I might switch this up a little. I had written to you, can you give us some pros and cons of working in both spaces that you've experienced? But instead of that, I'd rather just frame it as, I'd love to hear some of the differences from working like that DC military beat to a local in terms of culture in the newsroom, anything that comes to mind. I don't know. I'd like to just hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a perception that national news is the big leagues and community news is something else. I don't think that's true at all. I didn't think that before, but especially now that I've been working closely with local journalists, especially local journalists who've been doing this a long time, they have the exact same chops as all the national journalists I worked with, right? They care just as much. In fact, they have real deep understanding of their communities as they cover news in them for year after year after year. That I think, deserves some respect. I think one of the biggest differences between doing news nationally versus locally is that there is nowhere to hide. If people don't like your story, and they're telling you about it, they're telling you about it on the internet, right? At any of the big national places I worked, if people complain on the internet, you didn't have to deal with it. It wasn't part of your it wasn't part of your job. In the same way that a community, you're responsive to and work for the community in a way that national news, you're kind of living in a lane and you're trying to cover, news for a certain type of reader that really likes, what Politico is doing or CNN is doing or The Blaze is doing. And so it's just a little bit different in terms of responsiveness to the community. And I think also, you can't just ignore it when someone doesn't understand or agree with, how you've been covering a story. You have to really get in there and try to talk it through and talk about, I've heard kind of listen through some of your old podcasts, and Jonathan Keeling, who I've worked with before, and Matthew Watkins are kind of talking about this stuff too, about community newsrooms just have a different connection to the areas they cover, reporters live in the same geographic area as the storylines, right? Like when we're covering a expansion of a, not rail, but like bus lines, right? Something like that. Like when you're covering an infrastructure project, water issues, other things like that, like you are also affected by the outcome of that issue. And so like being a neutral arbiter of local issues, I think is hard too, especially this Spurs arena vote was pretty close. It was like 52-ish to 50 and a little bit above. So it was really close vote. And there was, emotions on all sides of that political issue. Like there's frustration with building Spurs another arena. There's those who are so worried, well, if they don't get the arena, we'll lose the Spurs. Like it's an incredibly emotional conversation, which makes covering an election like that really difficult because you're trying to be as fair and as neutral as you can be. But no matter what you do, somebody's going to think you did it wrong. And so trying to navigate that, I think, has been interesting because I have a pretty thick skin at this point in my journalism career. Sometimes in DC, you would get a call from like a Senate aide, and their job that day was to yell at you about your story. And your job was to say, disagree respectfully, and you both are done with your day and you maybe go grab a drink because like everyone's done their job that day. And I think communities are just not exactly that same way, where there's I think different emotions tied up in what you cover and how you cover it, and you have to deal with the community in a more authentic way. I think national news was kind of like, we're going to do this because this is our job. And everyone's done with their job today. But in a community, you can't. You go home to the same community that you worked in all day. And it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. You said earlier that when I was bracing for what you were going to say, you're like, when I told my colleagues in D.C. that I was going to go local, I thought that you were going to say, they're all like, oh, how could you do that? Why would you leave the big league? It's really interesting to me that they're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? But I think you outlined a lot of that.
That was
really
the reaction when I left Politico for the Blaze. Is like, why would you do that?
Right. Yeah. Well, things were.
But yeah.
That makes sense.
The connection to, I think, local news at this point is something that is having a resurgence of at least like respect for and the understanding of why it's so important. At least many in media, I think, understand how important it is. Like I truly believe that the future of news will be figured out in communities, not at the national level, because at the national level, again, there's always audience for what you're doing there. It's not about like in a community, you have to connect to the audience that you have. Like you can't find it's broadly connecting to your audience versus, giving, again, a lane of coverage that anybody who's interested will come to. You really have to connect with people where they're at just a little bit differently.
Local media publishers. You're already creating valuable local content. But what if I told you you're leaving serious money on the table every single week? Many local media outlets are only monetizing part of their inventory. Your stories are amazing and important to your communities, but they live and die on the page or in social. That means your ad space is maxed out, even though your content isn't. That's where localpod.co comes in. We turn your existing content into branded, automated podcasts with no extra work from your team. And we help you sell brand new audio ad inventory that didn't exist before. That means more ad revenue, deeper audience engagement, and zero added production time. If you're a local or niche publisher and want to grow your revenue without adding to your workload, go to localpod.co and book a free call. That's localpod.co. All right, back to the episode. Yeah, that stuff, there's exciting stuff happening. I meet a lot of interesting people through this show doing interesting stuff on the local, even hyper-local level. So I totally agree. You talked a bit about like that tight election for the Spurs stadium. And you'd also mentioned in our initial kind of back and forth, the report's approach to elections. Can you talk about that a little bit? We're fresh off of an election cycle. And like you said, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, this year, and that was our second election this year. So in May, we had a mayoral and city council election. And then in June, there was a runoff election for many of those races. So yeah, that was kind of our Super Bowl. I mean, I think the Spurs Arena vote also happening this year meant that we were in campaign coverage mode all year long. But in our May election cycle and then June runoff, we did 9 debates in 44 days as a community newsroom. One of my reporters, the government and politics reporter, Andrea Drush, worked with me at Politico back in the day, and she now covers government and politics for us. And so she and I and others, but Andrea and I mostly did the moderation of those and like the preparation of questions for those. And for our first mayoral debate, so there were 27 candidates in San Antonio's mayoral race. Yes. That would be an unproductive stage. That would not be a helpful stage, right? That would not be, you'd give people 30 seconds to answer a question and you'd not get anything accomplished. What we did, which is following the playbook of national presidential elections, was create a threshold of polling. There's not a ton of local polls, but there was one that we could rely on, as well as campaign fundraising and kind of professionalism of campaign operation to determine who would make our stage in the first round of the election for the mayoral debate. We ended up doing 8. We were prepared to make the stage even smaller than that, but as we were making the decision, that top 8 was pretty close, and it was close enough. Like there was kind of a clear delineation from that 8 to the rest of the field, and so that was where the dividing line fell. And that, 8 candidate debate was incredibly productive, got to some of the issues in a way that none of the other, town hall style conversations that anybody else was hosting in town. Like we just got into new territory because, when you make a decision like that, you might be criticized for it. But that is, in my experience, the way you run a professional debate. That's how you do it. Not everybody can be on the stage. And, we did it that way. And I think it was really serving of the community, but required courage to do it that way. And one thing that happened in that debate also, which I had wanted forever, was a spin room after the fact. So, back when I covered campaigns in Iowa and New Hampshire, one of my favorite things was the spin room, where the campaign surrogates would be out there, talking about how their candidate did in the debate and like reiterating their main points or trying to clean up if they made a mistake in the debate. Like those kind of and those rooms would just be packed with reporters and it's just this really fun energy. And so we did a spin room where we had surrogates from the campaigns there talking about, who won and why they won. And so just that level of kind of national professionalism of a campaign coverage and bringing that to a local election really served our community well. And same thing with our city council debates. We did a huge city council debate for, it would have been District 4 and District 6 on the south and kind of near west sides of town. And we did them at Port San Antonio. So it's this monster stage with like a huge screen showing all the candidates and all the city council candidates got invited. We didn't do like a cutoff for those. So everybody who was running for city council, we invited to do those debates. And I think we had all but one candidate in the first round of debates that we did show up and participate. And either in the District 4 or District 6 debate, one of the candidates in their opening remarks was like, "Thank you so much for hosting this. We haven't had that many opportunities to get together and talk to voters. Like
That's awesome.
Nobody's hosting things like this." And so we didn't make any money off those events. They were a significant investment of time and energy, but now we're seeing in terms of you always have to keep in mind, revenue at the same time that you do great journalism when you're in the line of business we're in. And we've seen now over the summer and into the fall, as we've done campaign, like newsroom campaigns trying to raise individual memberships dollars, we've seen many people cite our elections coverage as reasons that they're supporting us, and gratefulness for what we did in the May and June elections, as well as this November election, because it helped them be more informed about their vote in a way that they wouldn't have had that sort of, thoughtful interrogation of candidates in a public way where they've not been given the questions in advance. That's the other thing, is many of these forums that get hosted by community groups, they give them the questions in advance. It's all softball stuff. Like we ask difficult questions, and always fair, but difficult questions, on a stage with the lights on you and you're speaking directly to constituents. And I think that is, civic engagement work that needs to be done in communities because, we have so much emphasis on national politics, and we should. It's important. It affects your life. But the people who are holding local office have more impact on your daily life than the people who are in national office most of the time. And so treating local politics like it's the big leagues, I think is very much what we've done a really great job of in the past several years, but especially this year.
That's really cool. I mean, I live in a much smaller town, but I would love it if the people run for city council because I don't know anything about it's hard. You have to do so much digging to the 3 people running for the council. I'm like, they're not allowed, not that I care anyway, but they can't run under a party. I'm independent anyway, but I was like, they're saying the same thing. I can't tell what their stance is on anything. That's a really cool thing you did. I didn't have this in the prep, but it's come up a few times. You talked about leaving national because you're talking about figuring out how to build models in local. You were saying, the local people don't have, or local publishers don't have the luxury of having millions of eyeballs on a certain lane, like the national outlets. So San Antonio Report's a nonprofit, but I'm just curious, like, are you guys trying to innovate in terms of revenue? Like what's bringing the cash register? I'm sure donations and stuff, but are you experimenting with anything there? Just curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Our revenue pie chart looks a lot like the Texas Tribune's because we were built on what they were doing in ProPublica at the time. But event revenue is a more significant chunk of our overall picture than I think a lot of newsrooms have. Partly that's because we have some long-standing events, like we have a City Fest every year we do, as well as an education forum, both of which are pretty solidly revenue generating each year, as well as just kind of responsive to the news events. Our biggest proportion, like most newsrooms, is grants and foundations. I think that's something that we, like everyone else, is trying to reduce the percentage of that so you can increase the percentage of individual membership or, not reduce the dollar amount, but have more individual members, more business members. We have a business membership as well as through business membership, we have advertising that fits into ad slots on our sites as well as newsletter stuff. In terms of experimentation, newsletters is an area where we have the most direct connection to our audience. Like many, News Revenue Hub, if you haven't had them on your podcast before, you really should because they help newsrooms like us improve on that funnel of people in the door to read your story, getting more of them to convert to newsletter subscribers, getting a certain percentage of newsletter subscribers to become paying members. And when what you offer is free, doesn't have a paywall, as nonprofit newsrooms have set themselves up to be that community resource, you're really asking people to pay for something they don't have to pay for. And so it's out of the goodness of their hearts. And so only a certain percentage of people who read a story sign up for your newsletters, only a certain percentage of people who sign up for your newsletters, and end up becoming a member. And it takes time. And then once someone is a member, continuing to, upkeep that relationship, have them renew yearly, that's important too. And so like that piece of how the revenue works, I think for newsrooms like us, down the line, is philanthropy going to be as big a percentage of what supports a newsroom like ours or others in the community? I don't know. I think we need to really continue to grow and build the muscle of individual and business membership because that you can control. That's a little bit more immune to, for example, event revenue. If it's a tough economic year, you start to lose some of the sponsors you count on every year. And so then if you miss your events, but there's not a lot of room for error in budgets of organizations. And so, it's a real challenge trying to do this work and help it be sustainable or become sustainable. But I believe it's possible. It's just, slow work to build that community trust, to build up those monthly memberships every time. It's really nice when someone gives a big dollar amount, and I'm always appreciative of that. I'm also, always really honored when someone signs up at $10 a month, $20 a month, because that means that, we're as important to them as Netflix is, right? Like if you can pay for Netflix, you can pay for news. That's what I say. I think it's just, it's so important in this moment, as there's been a resurgence, I believe, in the understanding of the good that local news does for communities, we need to have a resurgence in the willingness to pay for it. If you want community newsrooms to exist, you got to support them. And that's, a big part of what we do is trying to make that case.
Great stuff. It's funny. have a love-hate thing with events. I've had a lot of people on recently. It's been like a theme on the show. I don't know why. It's just the people on. I love the community building. They can be profitable, but it's like there was a big event here in my town that we went to last year. It was great. And we went this year. I'm in Western Colorado. Never rains. Just cats and dogs all day. Like nobody showed up. I'm like, I felt so bad for the folks running the thing.
That's tough.
There's just so many other, variables out in the world. But thanks for running that down without me sending you prep. Okay, so it's kind of a big question I've been trying to ask everybody lately. So flash forward 5 years. I'd just like to get your hopes and predictions for the local media industry and also for yourself and the San Antonio report. How do you see things playing out?
I try not to predict too much. I think the goal is to do the work every day. Do want to see some of the things that are working in other communities, travel from community to community. Institute for Nonprofit News, INN, News Revenue Hub, which is another kind of connector of local nonprofit newsrooms. These are really great structures that help us pass best practices around and help us learn from each other. So we're not all kind of experimenting in the same way or in the same failed way. If someone else has learned something really doesn't work, we want to know that so that we don't spend a ton of time and effort on it. I think the biggest challenge for newsrooms like ours is always opportunity costs. Like we could be doing, so many things with our time every day. And so what should the focus be? Something we've been experimenting with recently is subtext. And so like texting with our community more and responding to questions in the moment. Slow and steady work to build that list. Again, unless you're paying a bunch of money for acquisition on that list, it's going to take time. One of the ways we found that does work is ahead of a big moment, pushing it out to the audience that like, hey, we'll text you election results right when it happens. That's a way to grow the list. It works. We've seen that. And if people have a question, they can say, hey, I'm not seeing this in the results. And a member of our newsroom is looking at, those questions and responding to them in the moment. I think that's the sort of community effort that is really needed in the future. My goal with that list down the line would be to build it big enough to disseminate news in an emergency situation. Like if you remember the winter freeze, which just predated me in San Antonio. I moved here like November.
A couple winters ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I moved here in November of the year that 2021, that the winter freeze had been really significant and, power was out. People were not having access to laptops in the same way they typically were.
Right.
And so to be able to text emergency information, I think, yes, that sometimes is the role of local government organizations, but I think news media also is a important non-arbited voice in a moment of confusion, because government entities and agencies have different goals in that moment. And like to get information to people is not always what they're doing. Sometimes they're trying to clear a road first before they get information to people. And so like newsrooms are going to look out for people and what they need to know when, in a way that I think building up kind of that muscle and being able to do emergency alerts is really important. Vertical video, should have been doing it 15 years ago. If you weren't doing it then, the next best time to start is now. We've been doing some of that and again, just kind of building up that muscle. It takes time to get good at stuff. And within a newsroom, it takes time to kind of upskill, staffers to be used to being able to do a quick, like explanatory 20-second, straight to camera vertical video about like, hey, I'm at the city council. They're about to vote on, a piece of the Spurs Arena deal project. And, we'll bring you the results in a few minutes, something like that. Like it seems easy, but it's not easy to have the quality good, have the sound good, have, any sort of graphic display that you need. Again, that's kind of a skill set that requires work and effort. I do think I have a take on video.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. The pivot to video really caused a lot of problems for newsrooms 10 years ago, being told, well, I don't know, you remember what time it was, around 10 years ago, being told or thinking that the algorithms of social media companies were going to prioritize video, and then everybody kind of upstaffed and put a lot of money into those budgets, and then it didn't end up delivering kind of what was expected, partly because of that and partly because now the emphasis is making sure that video feels native to the social platform that you're on. I'm just not convinced that that's the future. I think high quality video and reliability is going to be really important moving forward. And yes, you have to do it cheaply and quickly, but having the ability to be a responsible source of information on a vertical video platform in the moment when something's going on is really, really important, especially with, as we're going to see more and more like AI slop out there, like in a breaking news situation, it's going to be really hard to tell what's true and what's not true. And so having a responsible, high quality video strategy in those moments, I think is going to be what differentiates newsrooms versus anybody else doing updates in a breaking news scenario. But that's just my take. It's the idea of like do it fast, have it feel native to platform is like, I think that might be short term what works, but down the line, what we really need is trust.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't have said better myself. It's all about trust. Yeah, video, it's frustrating. It's so difficult to do. Everybody says you have to. I remember Mark Zuckerberg telling everybody like straight up, like everything's going to video. Everything's going to video. And then for his own, I have my own issues with Mark Zuckerberg, but that's okay, as the news industry does. Okay, we're coming up on time. Leigh, this has been awesome. I've loved this conversation. Where can people find you online, and anything you want me to link to in the show notes or promote to the audience?
Yeah, SanAntonioReport.org. We cover local news in San Antonio. If you are not local to San Antonio, maybe not everything will be interesting to you, but we do have a really exciting, actually. You're talking about experiments. We did a newsletter course that's like get to know San Antonio. It's Live Like a Local is what it's called, but talks about the history of San Antonio, kind of the macro storylines I was talking about, like where our water comes from, the fact that we sit on top of an aquifer, which really like changes the game for San Antonio versus other Texas cities when it comes to like water stability, things like that. Just like these big picture, like what is going on in this community? What does it mean for me? So it's a, I believe, 6-email course called Live Like a Local newsletter that we worked really hard on and has been very successful and is kind of building up experimentally this like evergreen traffic and also like creating an easier on-ramp to our coverage for those who maybe, wouldn't click on a city council story out of nowhere. Like they need a ton more information before they're ready to read a story like that, but they do need to know, okay, so I moved to Texas. What do I do first? Do I go to the DMV? Like, how do I pay my electric bill? All of those sorts of questions. And what is the history of downtown San Antonio? Like, what's going on with all these missions I see when I drive around? Like, things like that, where just the basic questions you ask are all answered in this newsletter series that we spend a lot of time on. And we just refreshed it as of like yesterday. So it's up to date. It's really interesting. And I think potentially an example of, the sort of work that's going to serve communities in the future. And not just, writing for ourselves, like the city council passed 7-3 today, this measure to XYZ. Like regular readers don't care about that in that way necessarily, like speaking the language of the community with just really community serving coverage. I think that newsletter is an effort to do that. And again, down the line, you're really going to care about that city council story. But if this is the first time you've connected with local news in your community, you need kind of the basics before you're ready to jump into the daily coverage in the same way that like an absolute news junkie will. And news junkies already read us, right? Like they read everything we have to say. They're really interested in it, but we don't want to keep just preaching to the choir. We want to keep bringing more people into the fold. And that's the goal.
Yeah, well said. Great stuff. I think it was Jonathan Keeling, somebody who's on the podcast said, that's always been the secret of the news industry is you hook them in with the high school sports and the weather, and then you get them with like the important information because not everybody's a news hound, like you said, or a news junkie.
Yeah, I like to call it an easier on ramp. I think that there's
totally.
In Texas, we have all sorts of freeway issues. You can't just hop up there. It's way up there. You got to find a way up to it.
Cool. Yeah. All right, Leigh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Small Press, Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.